Hello there. If you clicked on this video, you want to learn how to cast one of these, and this is a fly rod, a little bit better than you are today. And I'm going to give you some pointers on just how to do that. Because in the beginning, when I would cast, all the line would just fall right in front of me in a big heap of spaghetti. That happened to me, and I hope that this lesson will help mitigate that for you and help you get that line out just a little bit further. Stick with it. Fly fishing's not hard. It does take a little bit of technique and practice, but once you start to feel it and get it, you're gonna be like, wow, that thrill, right? When you make a great presentation and catch a fish, it's worth the effort that goes with it along the way. And we're gonna really get basic in this lesson too on some of the tips that I've learned over the years that have helped me that I'm gonna share with you in this video. First, may seem silly, but there is a way to properly hold the fly rod. And properly meaning it's just going to be better for you long term. By putting your thumb up on the cork, just like this, that helps give you some leverage, right? Gives you a little bit of leverage when you're casting. Some people like to put their forefinger, which is okay. Some people like to put their thumb. If you hold it like a suitcase though, you just lose a little bit of that leverage and you're more susceptible to moving your wrist a lot, which is a bad thing when you're fly fishing. So, hold the rod. I like my thumb on the cork. You can do your first finger, but just avoid holding it like a suitcase. Now, the first thing you need to do, and this is a big mistake that a lot of people make in the very beginning, is they don't take out enough line, right? You want to be able to pull out enough line, and before you even start casting, you want a full length of fly line beyond the tip of your fly rod. If I start casting right now, you can see right now there's no floating line from the tip of my fly rod. That's going to be really tough to start generating some line speed. So get a full length of floating line beyond the tip of your fly rod. Once you've done that, now you're ready to cast. Okay, so there's some fundamentals to know. Now, in the beginning, it's good practice to do a lot of false casting. But typically when you're fishing, false casting will be at a minimum. Typically you can get your line out there with just 1 or 2 false casts. So one of the misconceptions is that you have to keep going back and forth and back. The more you false cast, the more likelihood of a tangle. So try not to false cast too much. You will in the beginning, but it's not necessary to keep going and going and going and going. I did this myself, right? I noticed that I kept false casting, I let it hit the water and I keep false casting again, but yet the fly wouldn't go out any further. So and you're just scaring the fish. So learn from my mistakes early on. Don't do a ton of false casting. And you'll know once you start feeling the harmonics of the fly line and the fly rod all working together, you're gonna realize that you don't need to do a lot of false casting. Now, typically, one of the biggest mistakes new fly casters make is they allow the rod to go too far back on the back cast and too far forward on the forward cast. A great mental rule of thumb when you're first starting out is don't let the fly rod go back any further than 10 and no further than 2 o'clock on your casting stroke. As you begin to gain distance, your casting stroke will increase, but we'll go over that later. So in the very beginning though, have that mental mindset. Okay, don't let it go back any further than 10 o'clock, no further forward than 2 o'clock, and you're gonna find it's gonna work a lot better for you when you begin to cast. So you got your full length of line out from the tip. You're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm not gonna have any more. I'm not gonna let that fly rod go back any further than it needs to get the line out. Just like that. Even watch the back cast, right? One of the other big mistakes that people new to fly fishing and fly casting make is they come forward too quickly. They don't let the line fully extend out behind them. And that's typically why all the line just kind of falls at your feet. So make sure that your line goes all the way back before bringing it forward. I encourage anyone new, watch it, right? Wait for it and then bring it back. Wait to go all the way back and then bring it back. If you do that cadence, you're gonna have a lot more success when it comes to casting a fly rod. So wait for it, forward, wait for it, forward. Wait for it, forward. So now that you practice the casting stroke, what is your non-casting hand doing? My non-casting hand always has contact with the fly line. So a lot of new fly casters will move both hands. Try to, in the beginning, try to keep this hand working individually from your casting hand. And what I mean is you're kind of managing the line, right? Slack kills a cast. So you want to have basically a tight line from your non-casting hand all the way through the rod, all the way through the line. You can see when I'm casting, I'm holding on to the line and I'm keeping things tight to the end of the line. You see what I'm doing there? And now as I do the casting stroke, I'm letting a little bit of line out from my left hand and until the cast is done. So you see what I did there? So you're always managing the line with your left hand, kind of keeping the whole system from your hand to the fly, through the fly rod to the fly, always tight. You can have some slack down here, that's okay, but you want to keep it tight everywhere else. And I snagged the bottom. Time out. I'm back. All right, so you're gonna be snagging the bottom a lot when you first start out too. I let the fly sit too long and it hooked the bottom. So when you want to start getting a little more distance, you got to have enough fly line out to be able to reach those distances. So feel free to pull out 30, 40 feet of fly line. All right, so watch the casting stroke, watch my left hand. Again, we're letting everything get out there. I've got a double Minton indicator set up. So even with a lot of flies and stuff, you can still cast. The fundamentals are there. Watch the fly line in my left hand. See, now it's all casted out in front of me. So you're always managing the line with your left hand, making sure that you don't go too far back on the back cast and too far forward. Now you'll notice I'm doing a lot of false casting, and I'm doing a lot of false casting for demonstration purposes. I want to show you, this is probably about a 40-foot cast. I can make this happen on just a couple of false casts. Just like that, I've cast 40 feet and I've false casted twice. You don't need to do a ton of false casting if your mechanics are right. So remember how far back your fly rod's going, right? That's one of the things that kill the cast for most new fly fishers, is having it too far back and then you're bringing it back too quick. So think of a hand of a grandfather clock, right? Tick, tick, tick. Watch the line fully extend out behind you before bringing the rod forward. That'll make a huge difference. It made a huge difference for me when I started to have that patience during the casting stroke. It'll make a huge difference for you as well. So the other thing is, it took me a lot of months before I could start casting with any type of proficiency. So a lot of times I went out in my backyard or my local park and I just practiced. And practice will help you get there when you're out fishing. But if you follow those basic fundamentals when casting, it's going to help you out a ton. Now, there are a lot of different styles of casting, and what I'm going to show you has worked for me over the years. So typically, when I'm casting a fly rod, I kind of hold the fly rod out from me here when I'm casting. I do that because it's a preference, right? I don't like the flies getting too close to my head. You can cast at more of a 90 degree to your head. I like to kind of cast out here and keep everything away from my body. One of the things that kill a cast early on is when a new fly caster breaks their wrist. And what I mean by that is you want to use very little wrist action, right? Fly casting is not this, right? You don't want to use very much wrist at all. If you watch me, my wrist barely moves, right? I'm pretty much keeping it in the same type of position. I'm keeping my wrist, very little movement, very little at all. So you want to avoid breaking your wrist on the back cast or forward cast, because that also kind of messes with the dynamic of what you're trying to do, and essentially is build up line speed and make a nice loop in the floating line. So do your best not to break your wrist. You'll notice that I'm using a little elbow. I'm also using a little bit of shoulder while I cast. You can see how that's happening right there. Little elbow, little shoulder. And there's a little body language, right? Body language helps. Just like if you were a boxer, you want to use kind of your body to help power the punch. You want to use your body to help power the cast. So you'll notice that I do a little body language as well. I'm kind of moving with the motion of the fly rod. So if you practice those steps, right, and don't create any bad habits by breaking your wrist, you will get there, right? Takes a little patience, takes some practice, but you will get there. So the other pro tip that I want to share with you is fly line does make a difference. If you just bought that first fly rod setup that came with the rod, reel, and line, it's likely that line isn't great. Having a quality fly line really does make a huge difference. And I learned that the hard way. I was really struggling in the beginning. I had a setup that was already pre-made. And as soon as I went to my fly shop, which happened to be the Morning Hatch in Tacoma, way back in the day, Gary said, hey, I know it seems expensive. At that time, it was about 40 bucks. Today, they're about 80 bucks. I got a good fly line, and holy smokes, that made a huge difference. The other is the fly rod. The better the fly rod, the better the casting experience. It does make a difference. Typically, anyone new to fly casting, you want a moderately fast action to a medium fast action rod. Really does kind of help with the casting process. And as you get better, you might want to upgrade into a fast action rod, which helps you cut into the wind better and that type of thing. But look for a moderate fast action rod, and it's right in the wheelhouse of having a fly rod that's very forgiving on the cast. So I think I covered just about everything. So just stick with it, practice, and you'll get there. You'll start to feel it. You'll feel the mechanics start working. Oh, another pro tip for you. If your fly is grabbing your line through the cast, that means you're putting too much power into the cast, which creates too much of a bend on the rod, which then creates a tailing loop. And what that is the rod is bending so much that it's creating almost like a figure 8 loop from the back, and the fly comes around and grabs the fly line. So that means you're using too much power, right? It's not about how hard or how fast you can bring the rod back and forth. You want to generate power, but you want to do it and have the line and the rod and yourself all working in harmony to get the line out. So you don't need to use a ton of power. It's more of a finesse and a feel. And once you get those techniques down, you'll start to feel it. You'll feel it come together. All right. Well, if you need a little help with choosing the right gear, I put a couple videos together. This one covers tippet and tapered leaders if you have some questions there. And this one just kind of the basics that you need to get going with fly fishing. I hope that helps the next time you're out there fly fishing. And thanks so much for tuning in. And until the next time, fish on.